Having secure and strong borders ought not to mean the fact that we actually have to have people detained in offshore or even onshore facilities, particularly when they are children. What it means to have strong and secure borders, we shouldn't be just looking at protecting it right at the border. What it means is to make sure that the people having the difficulties in wanting to move around the place, perhaps because of unsatisfactory conditions where they live, be it famine, be it some other natural disaster, or be it violence due to warfare or tribal conflict, or even just persecution. What it really means is that we need to be proactive in these places. We need to be proactive adjacent to these places where these people begin to leave where they have been living. And we need to create safe places for assessment. These ought not to resemble in any way a detention centre, but rather be a safe location where people can do what they need to do, but actually be protected from the problems which they had before. If, for example, to be protected from famine means that they will be adequately fed, etc. If it is to be protection from warfare, they're going to be adequately protected from some of this conflict coming back in. People should be assessed in these locations. And the period of time for assessment for moving on to a good and safe place ought to be a very short time frame. A time frame only sufficient to establish, one, they are credible refugees, and two, that where they are from, it needs to be a place where they need to be able to be free to flee from. And three, the ascertaining of where a safe place for them to go is. And when we get to that point, that's when the person is then transferred to the host country where they will retain a refugee status. As far as Australia is concerned, they would be a refugee within Australia. Then what would happen is that we would be working through the international community to try and resolve the issue that caused the problem for the fleeing person in the first place. If it was in reference to famine, we will try and do what we can to alleviate the fact that there's no food there. If it is to do with warfare, we will try and do what we can to resolve the conflicts there. That's where our efforts should be. That is where the efforts should be of the United Nations. And that is what we should be paying the United Nations to do. When a person becomes a refugee and is permitted to come to Australia, they ought not to become citizens immediately in this country. They ought to remain refugees in this country with freedom of movement within the laws of Australia, to be able to make a life for themselves here, but at all times remaining a citizen of the country from where they came. And if, perchance, the matter is resolved in their place, where they've come from, in a reasonable time, they ought to be invited to return to that country. If perchance they want to immigrate to Australia and actually become citizens of Australia, they need to go through the strong, robust immigration proposals, the plans and actions that we, the Christian Democratic Party, have in fact put in place in our policy. Where in fact they will need to have a record to determine that they are people who are satisfying the legal requirements of a 10-year police clearance, the medical requirements of the fact that there is no infectious disease. By the way, many of these things ought to have been sorted out before they became here as refugees to this country. To keep our borders safe, to keep our country safe, to keep everything working well in this country, we need to manage, control exactly what happens. But we ought never to have another Manus Island. We ought never to have detention centres on Christmas Island. What we need to do is having processing places near the place where the problem is, and process the places under the United Nations so that when a person comes here, they are free to be able to be a part of the Australian community, howbeit still being a citizen of the country of their origin. We can do a lot better than we do now. The argument between the Labor Party, the Liberal Party and the Greens in reference to how we do this are all on the wrong track. On one hand, the Greens want anybody to come in. On the other hand, the Liberal Party have been having a strong border control so that they detain people in offshore detention centres. The Labor Party also used offshore detention centres, however they haven't discouraged people coming here in the manner that they ought. The discouragement for making the travel, particularly on unsafe boats, is a wise decision. But let's get it before they get onto the boats so we can make sure their passage is safe, because it's managed, it's controlled, and we're in charge of it, so that we know exactly who's coming here and that they know what is expected of them. Whenever we are a guest in another person's place, we have to know the rules which are there going to be placed upon us as a guest. When we become a citizen, then the things change a little at that time. But we must make sure that as a guest, we don't believe that we should change the rules to suit us. Refugees are in fact guests on a temporary protection visa. That was the old term. That's what we need to have. I'm Milton Kane, Christian Democratic Party.